Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is part 2 for the Zoom recorded lecture for the topic nuisance. So in the first part, we have covered the definition, the comparisons of nuisance and other thoughts which are quite overlapping or similar. And then we covered as well public nuisance, okay, especially the definition, the elements, okay, some of the cases. So for part 2, we are going to focus on private nuisance and also the elements required to prove the case under private nuisance. So we'll start with the definition. So private nuisance, it refers to unlawful interference with a person's use or enjoyment of land. So the keyword here is use or enjoyment, or some rights over or in connection with it. So basically, it revolves around the use, okay, or enjoyment of somebody's land, plaintiff's land, basically. And whenever there's any unlawful interference, okay, by the defendant, then plaintiff has the right to sue under private nuisance. Okay, this one just to show to you the comparison of private and public nuisance. So for public nuisance, it focuses on the damage or annoyance to the property, okay, to the public property which is shared with the public. But for private nuisance, okay, the emphasis is on the use and enjoyment. Okay, so it relates with interference with the use and enjoyment of private property. Whereas for public nuisance, interference which cause damage or annoyance to the public property shared by the public. So please get yourself clear and don't be confused with the differences or the two types here, okay, public and private nuisance, but both under nuisance. Okay, now we go to the types. Okay, for private nuisance, it's possible to further divide into three types here, or three subcategories of private nuisance. This is actually refers to in the way it might happen or it might take place. The first one is encroachment of plaintiff's land, encroach, okay? And then second is physical damage to plaintiff land or property. And number 3 is, I think, the most common one, disturbance of plaintiff's comfort and enjoyment of land. So it is something, it relates to comfort and enjoyment of the land belonging to the plaintiff. So that's basically the types of interference, in which it means that this kind of interference might happen and then it falls under private nuisance, in which plaintiff can take action against the defendant. Okay, now we want to know, okay, the query here is, when does a nuisance become actionable? Because maybe not all kinds of nuisance are actionable. So a nuisance become actionable, you can take action based on it, okay, when the interest of the plaintiff overweight the interest of the defendant. At the earlier part of the lecture, okay, we talk about the competing interest, okay, it's about balancing the interest and competing interest of plaintiff and defendant. So it will be actionable, okay, whenever the interest of the plaintiff overweight, okay, if we were to balance, so the plaintiff is heavier, okay, overweight the interest of the defendant. Okay, let's have a look at the local case. We discussed the case thoroughly when we when you had lecture for your thoughts one, which is on negligence. Okay, Stephen Hua, Cheng Lun, and others, and Highland Properties in Berhad is about the fallout, the Highland Towers tragedy. Okay, and this is part of the judgment, the quotation which is relevant for the topic nuisance. Okay, it is stated here: if defendant is a reasonable user, okay, emphasis is added. I put it in a bold color, bold font. He will not be liable for consequent harm to his neighbor's enjoyment of his land. But if the user is not reasonable, defendant will be liable, even though he may have exercised reasonable care and skill to avoid it. So the emphasis is on the elements of reasonableness. Okay? And actually the case was made, referred to the case of, common law case of Cambridge Water Company Limited and Eastern Counties Leather PLC. Okay, let's have a look at the case here. Common law, Matanya and National Provisional Bank Limited and another. This is actually example of interference. Okay, plaintiff complained of dust and noise. Okay, dust and noise caused by the building operations of defendant. So it is something which is common. Okay, anticipated whenever there's any operations. Okay, construction taking place there, then it will result in dust and noise. So the court held that defendant was liable in damages for nuisance. Because why? Because the very nature of the work carried out involved a risk of damage to plaintiff. It doesn't matter whether plaintiff has done whatever necessary in order to avoid dust and noise. So long it creates dust and noise and it affects enjoyment of plaintiff, then of course liability for nuisance is established and defendant must pay compensation. Okay, let's have a look at our local case. Rena Lane, KL Selamat. This is actually appeal case. And Datuk Dr. Harnam Singh, 1997. So plaintiff had for 18 years operate. This is the plaintiff was Datuk Dr. Harnam. Plaintiff had for 18 years operated a clinic and hospital for the treatment of ENT. So it's very specialized clinic here. And actually they are neighbors. I mean, plaintiff was on the lower floor, okay, ground floor, upstairs, downstairs, and then defendant was upstairs. So defendant operated a renal clinic. So both actually has a clinic but different clinics. So here, defendant Renal Link operated a renal clinic and which patient received hemodialysis. So it's specialized to give hemodialysis treatment on the floor above the plaintiff clinic. So one is downstairs, okay, plaintiff was downstairs and then defendant was upstairs. And defendant was found liable for emitting from their clinic obnoxious fumes, okay, which escape downwards into plaintiff clinic. So from the treatment, so it creates, okay, certain obnoxious fumes here, and then it goes to it escape downwards into Dr. Harnam's clinic, okay, ENT clinic. And then because of that, plaintiff staff and patients were found to have suffered substantial damage, okay, ranging from skin disease, etc. So it affects the whole staff, okay. So and then plaintiff won the case, okay, at the lower court. So against the decision, the appellant appealed. The defendant appealed against the decision. That's why we have Rana Ling and Dr. Harnam Singh. And this is the argument by both parties here, both sides, appellant and respondent. Appellant actually was the defendant at the lower court. So the counsel for the appellant said on the totality of evidence, okay, there was absent of any connection in point of causation. So they were trying to argue that actually there was a break of causation and there could be some other possible source of noxious fumes, not necessarily from their renal clinic. But counsel for the respondent, for the plaintiff, argued that, well, actually, why you didn't argue at the lower court? Okay, it had never been the appellant's case in the court below. So it's too late for you to argue when you appeal. So whatever basic facts, okay, the substance, the main facts, okay, it has to be resolved at the lower court, which heard the case at the first place, at the first instance. So the appeal court agreed, okay, with the counsel's argument, the respondent argument. So the court said, dismissing the appeal, the issue of another possible source of noxious fumes, okay, was rightly not considered by the learned trial judge as it was not addressed before her at the court below. So it wasn't the proper court to address such issue of break of chain of causation whatsoever. So still defendant was found, the liability remained. Okay, we have another case, local case as well, also appeal case, Syarikat Perniagaan Selangor Sdn Bhd and Fahrul Rozi, Mohdi and others, 1981, reported in MLJ. So it involves certain noise, okay, which create annoyance to the neighboring landowner. So that's why the respondent sued the appellants. Okay, this is to prevent the noise lah, because it creates annoyance to the plaintiff, okay, to the respondent as well as to the neighboring landowners, but much more on the respondent. So plaintiff actually applied for injunction to restrain the appellant or its servant, okay, from what? From operating or permitting to operate music bands, okay, so it creates noise, obviously, with singers from open air stages. It's not closed premises here, it's open air stage. And also the noise was created from the generator for the disco, okay, on its land until the trial of the action. So he was asked, I mean the party, the plaintiff was asking for injunction to stop, to prevent. So the learned trial judge granted the injunction, and that's why the respondent or defendant appealed. And the appeal court dismissed the appeal, and then it was stated the learned trial judge was entitled on the evidence to find that the noise was excessive and intolerable. So this is something above the degree of reasonableness, and that's why it was an actionable nuisance, and respondents, the plaintiff, were entitled to the injunction. So that's the decision by the court. And this is very important part of the judgment, because the court actually make it clear, okay, interpret what amounts to nuisance, especially in different locality. For example, it's stated here from the judgment, noise in urban society, like in KL, for example, okay, in big cities, there inevitably will be. So we expect some noises, and anyone living in town must expect to have to put up with certain volume. So we have to tolerate with certain level of volume, but it cannot exceed the tolerable one. And in turn, he must have the right to make certain amount of noise in the enjoyment of his property. Meaning that here we have the right, is either to enjoy certain level of noise or to tolerate. Okay, so it's a balance of interest again. But it is also just as clear, it is also stated here that no one has the right to create a volume of noise which by any reasonable standard becomes a nuisance. So the moment it amounts to nuisance above the acceptable degree, okay, it's a question of facts anyway. So actually it becomes a nuisance which is actionable. So the plaintiff can take actions against the defendant. Okay, we are done with the explanation on the types, okay, of interference, okay, which is actionable. Now we go to the elements of interference. I'm checking the time, because I don't want the lecture to be too long. Okay, all right. So basically, for private nuisance, as far as interference is concerned, okay, in order to prove that this is interference which is not reasonable, so first it has to be proved that first it is a substantial interference, and then another next, okay, we also must prove elements of unreasonableness, okay, because if it is reasonable, then again it doesn't amount to private nuisance. So unreasonableness here and interference with the plaintiff enjoyment must be unreasonable. So we are going to discuss one by one together with all the cases. We'll see whether we have time to discuss both. Okay, we go to the first one, substantial interference. Okay, so this is comparison. Unlike trespass, which is actionable per se, so basically for nuisance, okay, the claimant, the plaintiff, must prove that he has suffered certain damage, okay, which is both tangible and intangible interference. Okay, it covers both, but then you must prove that it is something which is substantial. Okay, and then it's not necessary, it's not really a condition that you prove any physical damage, so long you prove it is something which is substantial. Okay, what is substantial here? For example, unpleasant smell or generation of loud noise. Okay, so these are all considered as interference with amenities associated with land ownership. And then if it is substantial, then it is actually a ground for a valid claim for nuisance. Okay, and then it's necessary, okay, to distinguish between various kinds of interference. So meaning that here we want to see whether this is something which is substantial or not substantial. Okay, so what okay, so basically substantial is about it. Okay, so we don't have, I mean, the discussion is not that thorough. I mean, the something which is not something which is obvious, okay, substantial. Okay, it's actually related to this concept of unreasonableness, okay, of the interference. So defendant's interference was unreasonable, thereby making it unlawful. And the rule or the maxim here is sic utere tuo ut, I don't know how to pronounce it, okay, ut alienum non ledere. So this is a Latin term, which means, okay, in English it means use your own property as not to injure your neighbor's one. So you have the right to use and enjoy your own property, but you're not supposed to or to injure, okay, to create nuisance for your neighbor, okay, because neighbor also has equal rights, okay, to enjoy and use their land. All right, and this is we have actually a number of factors to determine the reasonable, whether interference is reasonable or not. Okay, what are the things that the court will take into consideration? Okay, the first one, the factors here, it might be relevant to certain cases, it might not be relevant. Okay, but this one is quite important. Okay, the first one, the extent and nature of the harm. So what does it mean here? So plaintiff must prove either physical damage to the land itself or property, or let's say it is something which is non-physical. So prove it relates to enjoyment of property or amenity. Okay, in the case of physical damage, okay, nature of locality need not be considered because it's very obvious. Okay, damage physically has been done, so we are not concerned with the locality. But in the case of non-physical damage, okay, the nature of locality may be relevant, may be taken into account. For example, loud noise, smell, fume, these are all non-physical. So whatever loud noise, smell, or fumes here from defendant's land, if it invades plaintiff land, then actually defendant cannot be said to have used his land reasonably because you are not supposed to create loud noise or smell or fumes, okay? And then it affects your neighbors, okay? The enjoyment and usage of neighbors' land. We have a case here, common law, St. Helens Smelting Company and Tipping, classic case, 1865 here. So the claimant was the owner of a manor house, very, very large, big house here, and then situated a short distance from defendant's copper smelting business. So defendant was actually the owner of the business, copper smelting. It's like factory, I think. He owned a factory. And then the claimant, the owner of the house, brought nuisance actions against the defendant, okay, in respect of the damage caused by the smelting works to their crops. Meaning that the crops are affected, the plants, okay, trees and foliage. So foliage means plant leaves, basically all the leaves. They are all damaged because of the copper smelting activities. And then actually in that area, there were several industrial businesses in the locality, including an alkali works. And then defending the case, he argued that the use of property was reasonable given the locality and the smelting works existed before the claimant purchased the property. So there were 2 points here. The first one, whatever we were doing actually was reasonable because of the locality. There were some other industries as well, okay, not only us having the business. Another argument is that actually we have the business first and then only you came later. I mean, you purchased the property later. We exist before you came to the locality. So the court held that, this is the observation or judgment by the court here, where there is physical damage, obviously like this case, damage caused to the crops, trees and foliage. So where there is physical damage to property, locality principle has no relevance. We're not going to look whether other business, other industrial exists or not, okay, because it causes or it creates physical damage, which is so obvious. And then also, it is no defense that claimant came to the nuisance. That's not a good ground for defending the case of nuisance. It doesn't matter, okay? So long you own the land, okay? You have the rights to enjoy the land, then it doesn't matter whether you come first or you come later. Okay, another case is Halsey and Esso Petroleum, 1961, also common law, reported in all England reports here. It was held that the nature of the interference here is noise and vibration, and then damage to clothes from acid smart. So it's noise, vibration, and then acid smart. So the court held that disturbing the neighbor's sleep by noise and vibration, and also damage to clothes. So there are 2 parts here. First, cannot sleep, and then later damage to the clothes from what? From acid smart. So all this thing amounts to nuisance. So obviously it is substantial and it is something which is not reasonable. Okay, on the basis from the aspect of extent and nature of the harm. So obviously this is something which is not reasonable. So I put there the meaning of the word acid smart. Okay, this is acidic particle emission, small flake of soot or dirt basically. So that's why it creates acid. Okay, acid smart. Another case here, example of extent and nature of the harm here, Bone and Seal, 1961. So just now it was about noise and vibration. Okay, now it's about smell. Okay, it was how that smell from neighbors pig farm, okay, invaded plaintiff land. So the smell, you can't really contain the smell, so it invaded, okay, the neighboring land. So the court held that it was a nuisance. So it was substantial, and then as far as next extent nature is concerned, also it's not reasonable. So it must be nuisance. Okay, let's have a look at local case. Woon Tan Kan, the disease, and 7 others, and Asian rare earth Sinamberhat here. So plaintiff sued defendant for injunction to restrain defendant company from operating and continuing to operate his factory. So now the individual, a number of plaintiffs suing the factory owner. Factory operator. So the operating a factory produce dangerous radioactive gases. So that's the interference, radioactive gases. So the court held that nuisance was established as the situation was something over and above normal inconvenience. So this is something which is substantial, and then it is something which is unreasonable. Okay, right. How do we move? Okay. Another case, okay, this is House of Lords decision, Hunter and Canary Wharf. House of Lords stated that this is actually the principle at common law. Interference with TV reception by a tall building could not amount to an actionable public or private nuisance. It was the reason of this decision. Because why? Such interference was not an interference with use or enjoyment of land. So, this is the rule at common law. Here at common law, anyone may build whatever he likes upon his land. So you have the right to build tall building, small building, big building, here, so long as it's on your land. If the effect is to interfere with the lights, air, or view of his neighbor, then that is the misfortune of the neighbor. So you cannot actually stop your neighbor from constructing a very tall building, for example. Okay, all right. So the owner's right to build can be restrained only by way of covenant, law of contract, or acquisition by grant of prescription, key of an easement of light or air for the benefit. So this is the way. But nuisance is not the way. Okay, you cannot really sue your neighbor for nuisance. So the only way to contain or to restrain is by way of covenant, contract law, as well as land law, easement. Okay, all right. So it's not, there's no remedy or there's no way to stop or to restrain, okay, under nuisance. Okay, we stop here. We are going to continue later with the second factor, okay, to determine the reasonable interference. Okay, hopefully you have been able to understand. Okay, all right. So with that, that's a lot. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.